Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program. My name is Ina Murray, and I'm the regional president for Wells Fargo here in the San Francisco market. And we're pleased to be supporting tonight's program as part of our commitment to the Commonwealth Club. Joining us tonight is Beth Comstock, former vice chair at General Electric and author of a new book, Imagine It Forward: Courage, Creativity, and the Power of Change. For more than 30 years, Beth was the change maker in chief at GE, where among many roles, she served as chief marketing and commercial officer and oversaw the funding of Hulu. For Beth, the idea of being change ready calls for people to have the courage to defy convention, the resilience to overcome doubts, and the savvy to know when to go around corporate gatekeepers to reinvent what is possible. Imagine It Forward is a guide for anyone looking to harness their creativity and drive change. Joining Beth in the conversation tonight is Gina Bianchini, an entrepreneur, investor, and founder and CEO of Mighty Networks. Gina has been a force for change in Silicon Valley for years, and we're thrilled she's part of tonight's important conversation. We're excited to have them with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Beth Comstock and Gina Bianchini to the Commonwealth Club.
Right here. Thank you, Ina. My name is Gina Bianchini. I am the founder and CEO of a startup here in Silicon Valley called Mighty Networks. But tonight, I am just an interested soul who is excited to be in conversation and thrilled to be in conversation with you, Beth.
Happy to be
Beth
here.
Comstock,
Thanks.
who is, I like to think about you as a business rock star.
A business rock star. Wow,
Yes.
that's a tall
But
order.
after
I don't know.
after reading this book, I think the much more appropriate term, which I just found so inspiring, is as a change agent, a change maker. How do you define what it means to be a change maker, and when did you know you were one?
Yeah, well, I didn't aspire to be one when I was growing up. That's for sure. To me, change maker is just somebody who just has a passion to discover what's new and what's next, and you believe in a better way, and you're going to make it happen. It's also a very entrepreneurial kind of trait, right? To believe in a better way, and you're going to do whatever you can to make it happen. So I think there's a part of an entrepreneur that's a change maker.
And when did you know you were one?
I think just as I kept finding myself in these positions where I wanted to be part of something better and different. I'd say my big epiphany came at one of the most formative jobs I ever had when I worked at NBC News, kind of the second time, and it was right after NBC had had a big crisis, the original fake news episode in the 90s, where the news division was basically brought to its knees. Everyone got fired, and I was brought in as part of a new team, and it was the most entrepreneurial assignment I had had. We had nothing to lose because everything had almost been lost. They had almost shut the news division down, and so we were encouraged.
What was the incident?
The incident was there was a Dateline episode where they faked a General Motors car blowing up. They faked it by putting rockets on the truck and blew it up for effect.
Talk about entrepreneurial.
Yeah, it was very entrepreneurial, and it basically got almost everyone fired.
Wow.
And so when you're in that position where you have nothing to lose, you become very creative. You become like, you bring this team together. And so for me, it was an incredible awakening that I could be part of change, that I could be valued for an opinion, that I could form a team around it. And it was just freeing. And to this day, probably one of the best jobs I ever had. So that was very early in my career. Wow. I would have probably been, early to mid 30s.
Wow. And so, one of the things that was really striking to me in reading the book, which it's awesome. And I found super inspiring to really sort of think about what does it mean to be an explorer, a change maker as an individual, as a leader of an organization, and then also as an advisor. You've played all three of those different roles. One of the things in your story that is super interesting is the fact that you have found yourself sort of time and time again being asked by someone to take on more responsibility, to take on a big challenge. and you haven't backed down from it. And that's why I was curious, when was kind of the moment that you knew you were not only capable, but excited for the thrill and the challenge of taking on something that didn't seem like it was possible? Because what you're describing in terms of NBC News was before you went to GE for the first time. And maybe you can share that story in terms of what you walked into.
Yeah, well, I grew up in NBC. GE owned NBC. I got a call one day from Jack Welch saying, "Hey, come upstairs. I want to talk to you." And he brought me into GE, and it was the height of sort of GE's ascension to, you know, rock star status as a company, and him as rock star CEO. And it was a time of, he was in the process of having a succession. He had announced that. But the culture was very much of perfection and precision. And it was very much Six Sigma had rocketed. He had used that to, you know, kind of help the company. At NBC, we did Six Sigma, and like we didn't know what we were doing. It was like, imagine, I mean, Six Sigma in a broadcasting network. I don't know. The best we came up with, we branded these hats that were really great. We called them QNBC. It was Quality NBC. And
my first exposure to Six Sigma was actually the 30 Rock episode.
Yeah, no, it's the best.
Yeah.
It's the best.
It's fantastic.
It's the best. But people thought we were launching the Queer Network, Queer NBC, and they became incredibly hot hats because people thought they were really, we were launching something really exciting, and it wasn't that exciting. But so I go to GE, and it was very much this precision culture, and so Jack leaves, Jeff Immelt comes in, and I think I was tasked with, at the time, I became Chief Marketing Officer, and we had to innovate. And it was really hard to innovate in a culture that was all about perfection. And trust me, like when you're flying a jet engine, wherever you're going next time, like it's plus Six Sigma. You want that to be as many Sigmas as possible. Right. But if you're going to innovate, a quest for perfection holds you back. Right. And so people go around measuring defects. And if you made a mistake, you were a defect. Right. That was the environment I walked into.
Well, and one of the things I thought was so interesting about that story was there was a very, you know, so many times change making, discovery, exploration, even just the term innovation or disruption, you know, it can almost be mocked as terms.
And for good reason.
Yeah, and they become, or they're used in so many generic ways that they actually become almost meaningless. Yeah. And what I found reading the book that was so cool is there was a very specific reason that GE was moving from the Six Sigma financial operations and engineering and manufacturing excellence to innovation and exploration, which was this move from, you know, essentially manufactured growth to organic growth. And so I'd love to kind of, you know, it's sort of a multi-part conversation or question. Really, one, what was that like to go through the transition of a corporate strategy, which in that case, you know, you're moving, 300,000 employees? Yeah. And just what was that experience like? And then there's also a really interesting aspect, which was not only were you entering an organization that had 300,000 employees and was moving to needed to move to a very different culture and a very different metric, which was organic growth, but you were also doing it in a role that you had never had before. Yeah.
So, I mean, the organic mandate was clear. The company had grown a lot through acquisition, and I think that happens a lot in business where you grow through acquisition, but you need to grow what you have. Yeah. And the world was becoming more global, and the opportunity to grow meant you had to go to new markets. And you had to discover all kinds of new trends. You had to be part of the world. And that was the mandate, right? And so I came in as the Chief Marketing Officer.
You hadn't been one before.
I hadn't been one.
You hadn't even been like a marketing director.
Well, I had been in NBC. Right. I had led advertising at GE. Right. But marketing and advertising is just a small part of marketing. And sort of to me, the opportunity was marketing's about the market. Like, this is it. It's about growth. It's about making the market. It's about, and when when you take your job seriously, it's about marketing. Live in the market, you start to see change, you start to see patterns. And so that really became, I think the discovery for us was, hey, marketing should be brought to the beginning of the process. It's the GPS of an organization. It's where's the world going? And that was really our calling card.
So moving from, and was that the expectation of GE, your peers at GE?
No, not at all. I mean, it was Jeff Immelt's expectation that he wanted a team that could help us point to where the world was going and to help drive new revenue. That was organic growth, new revenue. And he just kind of said, here, go figure it out. And I hadn't been trained classically. I hadn't been to business school. I grew up in media. And so I had to kind of forge a new path. People were like, why are you here? They didn't want to know they didn't really even understand what marketing was, nor did I really.
Right.
But the sense of, it's not just what you the story you tell. It's not just the ad you do. So we went out and hired a bunch of great marketing people. I hired a bunch of MBAs, which we can come back to. I think that they were helpful. They brought their toolkit, but they were not as entrepreneurial and figure it out kind of people as we ultimately needed. Right. But it was really just, let's get people in, let's just go to the markets and see what's happening. And that was the journey that we went on.
How, one of the universal lessons of this enormous challenge, because you guys were successful in it too, which is and when you hired MBAs, it wasn't like you hired a couple summer interns.
No, we hired 100
You hired
MBAs
like 100, and you sent them off to emerging markets and different markets, and then brought them back, which is a scale that, again, you weren't also just trying to grow revenue organically. You were like, it was like 5 Ubers.
No, we had
like
to,
that.
at the time, we had to grow. I'm on the board of Nike. And so we had to grow
like
a
2
Nike.
Nikes.
We had to grow a Nike every year. At the time, a Nike every year, a Starbucks every year. That was the challenge. And so you had to find new growth. And the culture was very much, it's a very great culture, performance-driven, integrity, all those things. But really kind of waiting for the checklist, wanting to kind of be told what to do in some respects.
Right.
And we were forging yet another lane that said, we don't know the answer. We don't know where we're going. We don't know. Right. And that uncertainty, I think, creates tension. And it created some tension in the culture.
I want to come back to the culture for a second, but you're sitting there the night that you get this mandate, or you're being presented with this new opportunity that is new. Not only the new opportunity, new to you, but it's also new and new to the company. What was that process like for you in terms of, one, steeling yourself to say, okay, I'm going to do this? Did it come from a place of naivete, or do you feel like it came from a place of just, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to stay open to it?
It was a bit of both. Yeah. Definitely naivete of not knowing enough to not know what I don't know.
Right.
And then just the openness. I think in times like those, I rely on my curiosity. Where is it going to take me? What can I learn? So for the first 100 days, my method is just to do what I do. I go into discovery mode. I called everybody I knew. I called up famous chief marketing officers of major companies and said, I'm new in this job. Can I come and study from you? I called up, college professors like Phil Kotler of Northwestern, who'd written textbooks. I read his textbooks. I'd call him up and say, can I ask you questions? So I just went to school, literally, and tried to hire great people who had knowledge that I didn't have, and to just try to get going in it. And I think that's been my go-to move. Yeah. Just whenever I don't know, I get out and I just try to get into discovery mode. And that's really part of what I'm trying to do with the book, is to encourage people to be comfortable with not always feel like you're going to have the answer. Right. To make room for discovery. It's a part of the book that I'm actually most passionate about. And too often we just want to stick with what we know. We don't want to get out of our existing habits. And so I try to make a case that if you're not out in the world trying to see patterns, understand where change is happening, you're going to be disrupted by it. Right. And I think everybody has to make that part of their job. You don't just delegate it to the marketing department, the insights department. So one of the things I encourage people is just pick 10% of your time. 10%. I guarantee you everybody has 10% of their time that they're currently in meetings, doing things they've already done the same old way, that they don't really need to be there. Can you find 10% of your time and just force yourself out to see things, just to go to places where things challenge challenge what you know. go to places that are seemingly weird, right? Things that you're like, what does this have to do with what I'm doing? Well, there's a trend here. I think I need to understand it. And those are, I think, what everybody needs to do to get ready for change.
What has been the weirdest thing that you've done?
Okay, well, this one was a pretty weird one. There have been some weird ones. I mean, we were looking early on at new methods of manufacturing, looking at 3D printing. I would hang out at maker spaces. That wasn't so weird. At the time, it was a bit weird. But early on was going to these places where they were doing 3D printing in plastics. And I was with a lot of really tough engineers, and they were already thinking this was silly, this was crazy. So I'm like, I reached into the machine to pull out this plastic toy, and it was a sex toy that was being made in a production shop. And I'm here with my engineer friends, and you're like, okay. And they're like, I thought this was a sophisticated manufacturing operation. And so you have to, at that moment, go,
It is.
It is. It depends on what you're looking for. But you might think this is, frivolous or for another purpose today, but imagine this is going to be made in metal, and it's going to be eventually find its way into a jet engine. I mean, you just have to sort of put yourself in those places. I've gone to study non-hierarchical military methods in Israel, sort of studying with generals and bringing top-tier executives into military barracks in Israel to understand what's happening. For me, one of the weirdest places I went, and it's not so much now, but at the time I was one of the first women in my company to go to Saudi Arabia. And there were a lot of women I worked with who were like, I'm not going to go there, I don't like the way they treat women. Well, I didn't like the way they treated women either, but I had to see it for myself.
Right.
And so I went in, and we were doing a project to understand healthcare in Saudi Arabia, and I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity. I met the most amazing women. We went on a discovery, understood that women were having a real hard time being diagnosed with breast cancer early because just a lot of cultural issues, and they were dying.
Right.
And so we got to get right in there and understand from really smart women how we could help be part of that system. If I had taken that belief of, oh, I can't go see for myself, I think we would have all missed some opportunity.
Yeah. One of the things I've always been impressed with you is you've always made the time. Like, I run a startup in Silicon Valley. It's sweet, but not that sweet. And like when you're...
I found you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and
we found me or something.
Yeah.
We found each other.
We found each other. And I think that openness and that curiosity has been something that has really defined you as a professional and you as a leader. Shifting to thinking about you as a leader and driving forward not only change, but just, discovery and how you think about discovery and exploration. I mean, you were not entering organizations that were like really fired up for it. And I'm curious, so you basically get yourself comfortable with the 10%, but also putting yourself in situations and saying yes to things.
Yeah.
As an individual.
Saying yes to pretty much anything.
Yeah. I mean,
there are limits, but pretty much anything because I want to learn.
Right. How do you infuse that as a leader into not just your own team that you have, direct reports, but you are coming out of an incredibly matrixed organization, as many people in this room probably have as well, where it feels like, the best case scenario is the skeptics will speak up, and the worst case scenario is people are, I think the technical term for it is blowing you up behind your back.
Yeah.
How do you actually think about, and what did you do that in hindsight really worked, and that if you could wave a magic wand and go back in time, you would want to have done more of or less of?
Yeah, well, partly because I defined my job was I was going to be more externally focused in a company that was very internally focused. It was, in some ways, an easy opportunity because it's not like everybody else was doing it. So I just grabbed that. I kind of saw what wasn't happening and said, I'm going to make that my job. I put myself out there. Yeah. I'm, and we can maybe get this, but I'm by nature more shy and introverted. So that seemingly is at odds, but it's that curiosity. I just want to learn, and I like seeing what's new and next. So I put myself in those positions where I can learn. And so I'm kind of the advanced person, the advance woman of the company. And I talk about in the book this idea of being the outsider inside. And I feel like that's always been a way I've looked at myself being a bit different. I mean, I left media to go to GE. There weren't many people leaving NBC to go to GE. But yet it's...
And then go back.
And then go back. But yet it seems so... like, why not? It's this huge platform. I wanted to learn. So I kind of make sure I put myself there. So first thing is people see me doing it. And so often it's like, oh, it's so silly. Like, why are you wasting your time? But with enough pattern recognition, I am able to say, see, I saw this. I think it's really great when you can take your teams together. A simple trick I always liked was something just Field Trip Friday. It's a really simple concept, but once a month, take your team together and go explore something new. And it can, I remember we were looking at new models of energy, and we went and studied vertical farming in New York City, and how are they using energy and water. I mean, you know, these kind of things most places will let you come in and learn from them. And then you just sort of graduate from there. What you're trying to do, I call it going on threes. It's a really simple device, and it's really just pattern recognition. So the first time I go out and I'll try to see something and I'll make note of it. Oh, that's really, I'll see something and it'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Second time, it's like, huh, I'm seeing is that a coincidence? Third time, I just declare it's a trend. Like, I'm seeing this 3 times, and in 3 settings, I'm going to declare it's a trend. Let's go to work. Let's figure out what's going on. Why do we need to understand this, and why is it relevant to us? So, and then you have to start bringing those insights in. I call them sparks. You bring in people that have expertise in this new weird thing, and you make the team feel really uncomfortable because they provoke them. I remember in the early days of we've got some folks here who are experts in blockchain and Bitcoin. And bringing in some of the real early pioneers, many of them from here, into our financial services team, and forcing them over dinner for 3 hours to have really uncomfortable conversations, people talking about things they had no idea what they were talking about. But usually out of that, they're like, oh, and you're there translating and facilitating. You see, if this happens, okay, maybe it's not the cryptocurrency we care about, but what about Hyperledger? What about the ability to have a totally transparent ledger? What will that do to the accounting systems of our company? Right. So your job is a bit of in that role, the outsider inside, is a translator, almost like a midwife. You're kind of trying to bring along that process. But people have to see it for themselves, and I think that's where companies, organizations fall down. Yes, I am a big believer in futurists and consultants and people like that, but what happens if you're not careful is you're a bit of the cool kid, trendy, smarty pants, and people are like, shut up. I don't know what you're talking about. They have to see it for themselves. They have to make room for it in their own way. So that's a lot of those kind of group exercises, the field trips you're doing together, is that people have to make their sense of these new trends.
And how have you done that, especially in established organizations, the innovator's dilemma, the analog dollars and digital pennies, as an example from the digital advertising era. That is just such a great example of, everybody actually has a point of view that's accurate. Yeah. Yes, it is less money today, but how do you reframe people's perspectives, especially people that you are influencing as peers, or even people that don't report to you, that are more senior to you? What have you found works? Because it seems like harnessing that kind of, lightning in a bottle is something that each and every one of us can take into work tomorrow. Yeah,
well, I think what doesn't work is to come in and go, like, you don't get it, do you? Which I've been incredibly guilty of doing in my career. And you talk about the digital pennies, the digital pennies versus analog dollars. That was a big thing when I was at NBC, and the arrival, I'll sort of take you back to that time. It was the arrival of YouTube on the scene. And if you were in media at the time, you were equal parts bemused and horrified. You were bemused because it was like, oh, so cute, these cats playing piano, isn't that so cute? That's really clever. And then you were panicked because you're like, well, what if everybody likes cats playing piano and they don't want what we make anymore? What are we going to do? Yeah. So the first thing you do is you try to bring in people who are good at doing videos of cats playing the piano. And we did that, right? I mean, we tried to bring in people, early pioneers who did kind of short videos, trying to embed them, in this case, working even in places like Saturday Night Live and places like that, where you're trying to embed some of that or taking the examples that are happening and blowing them up. In that case, Saturday Night Live had a big hit with something called Lazy Monday, and it was
Lazy Sunday.
Lazy Sunday, sorry, and it became created all these viral hits on Lazy Monday and other things. But Lazy Sunday was, this huge. It kind of broke the internet of its day, and you go, that's good. Like, we can do that, and let's bring in more people like that. And so you salute the people inside who are doing that. They become your heroes, and you find a way to fund more of that. And you say, be like them. So it's just a continual seeding of that environment. The worst thing you can do is just say, okay, this is the new thing, now everybody change, and this is it, because people don't want to do that.
Or allow for an organization, and this certainly happened during, the dot-com bust, where it was like everybody who was in traditional media breathed a sigh of relief because this whole internet thing was not actually going to happen.
Yeah. And you have to keep pushing it. You have to keep pushing it. And there are a lot of failures. There are a lot of things that don't work. We did big acquisitions. At the time, we did a big acquisition called iVillage that was this amazing community. And it was the perfect strategy. It was community meets content. And, in our mind, we didn't have enough foresight to think this is the next Facebook. Facebook was just arriving on the scene. But you saw the pieces there, but we totally botched it up. We put all the big company sort of ethos. You killed it. You rejected we picked a property that probably wasn't as savvy technically as it needed to be, and then the organization just kills it. So that's a lot of what you have to be prepared to do as you're getting ready for these new things. And so you have to be patient. You have to be willing to put some dollars at work on things that aren't going to work out, and you have to keep doing it. Now, a decade later, you look back and you say those things were going to happen, but you often don't have a decade to say, see, told you so. Right.
Well, and what's so amazing about your career is, that for every iVillage, there's a Hulu.
Yeah.
For every, for every failure, there's a Ecomagination, and these types of things that really not only delivered, and this is where I think the innovation that you really spearheaded and organized and collaborated and really shifted culture at GE is so impressive, because you did it. Yes, there was investment, but there was absolutely the expectation that it was about, like, Ecomagination was about the environment, but also about economics. Yeah. You're going to make some money. And maybe you can share a little bit about that story, because coming back to what we were talking about earlier of this cultural shift and a trend shift. What you did with that and what the leadership team at GE did with Ecomagination is pretty incredible.
Yeah, well, it's a similar kind of what you're hopefully seeing a pattern here as I'm talking. I mean, at the time, we were hearing from our customers that they were in different industries, air, train, energy, that they were seeing regulation in Europe. They were fearful that they were going to have a financial hardship if regulation came here and they weren't ready for it. And they said, what can you do? You start to see the pattern recognition. Team goes to work. Let's go discover. Let's go in the market. Let's figure out what the trends are saying. And it was, again, back to like cats playing piano. It was very silly. Central generation energy business. So, wind is cute. It's cute. The energy from the sun. Yeah, that's cute. Like, that's really cute. But so you have to get out and discover. You have to have a champion. We had a champion in Jeff Immelt, CEO and chairman of GE, who championed the discovery of those, who made room for that. So you have to have that. You have to have time to see the patterns. And I say one of the best things that I learned out of that is you have to take some of those naysayers, the stakeholders that are building that future, and you have to dream together. So what often holds companies back is it's like, well, my customers will never go for that. So green tech, okay, some customers want it, but we got a lot of customers that are never going to go for that. So what we created were dreaming sessions with customers, where we brought top energy customers, brought them together. We said, we're going to dream out 10 years. We gave them virtual currency. I mean, it wasn't cryptocurrency, but it was, okay, here's $1 million. What are you going to spend it on? And we literally imagined it forward. What's the future look like? If you're investing our money with us, what technology? Out of that came a much more enhanced position in wind. But you did it together, and the sales team that was very nervous, like we're going to get ahead of our customers, the finance team, oh no, we're going to get ahead of the market, started to see like, our customers will sign up for this. They're buying in for this. Yeah. So you're getting over the fear. That's what you're doing. And you're creating a shared vision for the future and a story together. And those things, and then you have to go to work. And so in ECO, we said, okay, we're going to invest money. We're going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to talk to a lot of people in the clean space who previously had criticized us because we had a pretty harsh, we had fought the EPA on some things, so we had to really put ourselves out there, take risk. So all the time you're working through this situation where ultimately the bottom line is people are afraid. Right. They're afraid of taking a risk, they're afraid of change, they're afraid of losing business. And the interesting sort of footnote to the ECO effort is, while we were talking to customers who were planning the future, other customers were like, I don't want anything to do with this. And we did lose one customer to the tune of at least $100 million. And you have to, at that moment, Jeff Immelt, he didn't tell us, the team that was developing it, which I really appreciated. So you have to protect those nascent teams and make sure they're not losing confidence and that they keep pushing forward and that you have enough good insight that you're on the right path.
Well, and I loved that story because it really does speak to what it means to be a leader.
Yeah, it does.
Is sometimes you have to actually take it, and it's not about spreading fear, but rather you actually containing it. And that's also why I asked the question around how do you take care of yourself as a leader, and ensure that you actually have the resilience and the things that you need to push forward to that 10-year vision and to that future that can have a number of different possibilities.
I think that I'd love your answer on that too. I mean, to the resilience of the future, I think because it's not that you predict the future. I don't believe that. No one really does, but you have such confidence that the world is going that way because you've been out seeing it. You absolutely believe it because you've seen it.
Right.
And so that gives you a confidence to keep fighting for it. Right. You're with a team, you believe it. So I'm sure it's the same with you as an entrepreneur, right? I mean, you're creating something that other people don't see.
Right. Well, and one of the things I loved in the book was talking about having multiple futures.
Yeah.
And really thinking about not just 10 years out is going to look one way, but it could actually look 4 different ways.
Yeah.
And what I've actually found is that if you have that sort of multiple future approach, all you actually can focus on and need to focus on today is what's the next step that keeps that optionality open for you. The other thing I think is actually really interesting is that if you look at, whether it's, political or military strategy, or you look at like super airy-fairy self-help stuff, or if you look at sort of neurobiology, it all actually says exactly what you're saying, which is you imagine the future, you live in that imagined future, and then you basically figure out what pieces you have to put in place today to give that future the best possibility of happening.
Absolutely. And it's small steps. And it's a story, too. I think people often forget that. I just think story is so important, and maybe because I grew up as a storyteller, but this idea of it's a story for the future. And I worry somewhat in our culture, just global world we're in right now, that we're not telling ourselves enough stories about the future. We're kind of stuck in this, past, and the future is scary. And so we're just kind of hunkered down. And, anyone who's sort of gone on these journeys of innovators, one of the great stories that sort of trotted out in innovation circles is the JFK, we're going to put a man on the moon. But I love that as a story because it mobilizes people. It says we're going to go there. And I worry right now that we've lost sight a bit of that, that's possible. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think we need to ask ourselves.
Well, I like the way you put it, which is a fight for the future.
Yeah, it's a fight. And for me, that's why I felt I had to write this book, because I worked in so many with a lot of people, my colleagues and customers, and you just need people, especially the middle of the company, the middle career, just go, we need you. Like, you need to take a risk, you need to take a position, and too often they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to lose their job, they're afraid they're going to lose face, and we're not encouraging, I don't believe, enough of that risk-taking. To me, risk is the willingness to act on imagination. And where is that?
The willingness to act on imagination.
Yeah, because it's like, I see that. I see that. We're going there. Okay, am I going to take the risk? And I think people think it's a big risk.
Right.
And that's my big learning. And this is what big companies do all the time. And you see this as an entrepreneur, right? I mean, you get funding, but you're not going to throw all your funding at it all at once. Big companies do that a lot. They throw a lot of money at it, and then they wonder why they're not successful, as opposed to those small, deliberate steps, and you're testing and learning your way forward until you get enough momentum.
Well, and this is what I love about what you're sharing, and I'd love for you to even share, more examples of this. You say innovation is a social activity.
Yeah.
It is about collaboration, and it's not about, one guy going up to a mountain, sitting on it for a while, having a thunderbolt of lightning hit his brain, walk down the mountain, and then basically have defined the future. It's a social activity. It's a collaboration. It's a group exploration, and it's having a diversity of opinions, including the skeptics, at the table. And it seems like you have been able in your career to pull that together, not once, not twice, but in a regular and consistent pattern.
Well, I do believe, and this was a hard lesson learned, you do have to invite the critics in. I mean, there's nothing I like better than a group of people who just think like me and act like me, and we have just brilliant ideas, except they're usually not that brilliant.
Right.
And so you learn along the way that you need somebody in there to beat up the ideas, because, that person who criticized you, actually they were right. And so you start inviting them in, and you start realizing that too many of the same people thinking aren't going to get you there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a hard practice, a hard learning. In the book, I talk a lot about my last time at NBC, which was probably the hardest assignment I ever had. And it was, I call it agitated inquiry. And the critics were kind of twofold. There were the ones who really wanted to battle test the idea to make it better. And then there are the ones who were afraid. They're afraid, they don't want to make change, and we all deal with that. There are the sort of gatekeepers, the people who they hold on to what little power they have. They fight for hanging on, and they want to put a hex. To them, they want to put a hex on change, and you have to find a resilience to keep going around that, to keep going around it. And so I guess a resilience builds up in you by seeing, like, you see that opportunity, and I'm not going to let you get in the way. And so the more you have a team that does that, the more momentum you create together.
Right. Have you found that kind of skeptic can thwart you?
Definitely. I mean, I have seen.
And what's an example of that?
Well, and somewhat kind of boring. I mean, I think every situation I sort of talk about in the book, there are skeptics there who say we're not going to do that. We're just not going to do that. I mean, clean energy would have been a really great example. We're not going to do that because we're going to lose our customers. We're not going to do that because the public will never accept that we could be a green energy company.
Right. And one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation is the notion of, rather than trying to influence your organization through people internally to the outside, is actually one of the ways to go around them is bring the outside people in, with both the skeptics, the people who are afraid, and the true believers, all in the session together.
Yeah, I think that's
totally
exactly right, Gina. You're constantly triangulating the inside and the out. I mean, another example, back to, the example's less relevant, but the outcome I think you'll understand is this arrival of new manufacturing models, 3D printing. It really challenged people, and we created an opportunity with our toughest engineers to say, well, what if there is a better way? Yeah. And so we did a open challenge to just say, hey, is there anybody out out there who can print this part better? And they were so skeptical, and they thought we were so silly. But okay, if you're going to pay for it, or you're going to embarrass yourself, I'll watch. And we go and we put this part out, and we find a 17-year-old kid in Indonesia who's able to do something that our scientists said was not possible. And so that.
What happened to that kid? Is he working at GE?
He hopefully should be. He got a nice little prize, and we got some money. And I mean, then the team had to validate it. But
what's his email address?
Yeah, he was pretty good. But those things become proof points, and then the team's like, okay, I want to be part of that. I see that. So you're trying to, it's that create that surround sound.
Yeah.
We took little MakerBots. These were toys a few years ago, right? They were toys. They were printing plastic stuff, and we put it in engineering pods, and we just said, what's going to happen? And what you started to see were really curious engineers said, I can do something with this. I'm going to prototype parts. I'm going to take it to customers. There's yet another group that's like, I'm not sure, I'm skeptical, I want to see, and they're watching that group. And there's another group that's never going to do it. It's a toy, I'm not going to do it. But you're creating that opportunity for people to kind of find their own way there.
Yeah.
So those are some of the ways I've found effective to kind of bring that really outside in and the inside to that.
And you know, we are sitting here in the middle of an entrepreneurial culture in San Francisco. One of the things that you have done in the time I've known you is really found ways to bring startups into conversations with a larger company. And you know, there is sometimes this sense in the narrative of startups being like, we're going to go and disrupt anything, and we're disrupting you, and we're going to put you out of a job, and you're irrelevant.
Until they get to scale.
Right. And then they're like, hey, can we hire you? Because you guys actually figured out how to do the thing that we now need to go do. But I am curious, you know, and then I have such good questions from the audience to share as well. But I'm curious, you know, what are some of the things that you've found for either, you know, whether it's people working at smaller companies or people that have an idea, you know, and as they start to think about navigating larger organizations, what are some of the things that you have found that are really important to embarking on those conversations, journeys, discovery processes?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is even big companies, you got to look at the small teams that are there. Don't just look at it as this big monolith, because the real change happens in smaller teams. So I often find startups will be like, yeah, I just met the CEO of Wells Fargo, like, I'm in. And you're probably not, because if the CEO comes in and says, Ina, we're gonna hire this team, everybody in the
Ina might do it, but anybody else is like, yeah, I'll get right on that.
No, and they're like, no, I'm not going to do it just because the CEO says. So I often advise people to, you know, identify what problem you're trying to solve and why you can help the scaled company do it. I think you have to focus on that problem. Too often you find startups coming into big companies and saying like, you know, it's all about me, as opposed to what's that problem I'm going to help you solve.
Yeah.
You need
that problem I'm going to help you solve.
Right.
I think that is a tweetable moment.
I think you have to find a champion. You're looking at those, you're going to go find the Ina at Wells. You're going to say, Ina, champion me through this. I need to have somebody who's like helping guide me through, is going to help me get unstuck. Big companies need to put money at work for this. It's not a philanthropy. A startup is going to go out of business in the time a big company is going to react. So I always thought a good rule that I saw some startups use was, we're going to try it. We're going to have like 3 meetings, and if you're committed, we'll go forward. But we're not going to have 12 meetings, right? We're not going to do this. So I think there are some ground rules you have to put in place. And there are ways that big companies can put money to work without taking an equity stake. They can fund a pilot project. They can take you to a customer. So some of those kind of early steps don't always just go to getting married and saying like, you have to have an equity stake in the company.
Right.
So those are a couple of things I would urge small companies to think about. But they need scale. They need access to customers. Big companies need disruptive ideas, speed, nimble thinking. In theory, it should be a really good partnership, but you have to be committed to a joint problem and kind of create a separate lane and protect the program.
Well, and I think that's a great segue to some of our audience questions. One being, how did you start thinking about, and how did you even first discover sort of the lean startup methodology and Eric Ries and all of the great things that, you know, he's really spent his career uncovering? And how did you bring that into GE?
Yeah, well, in my discovery mode, I had some colleagues. We went to a book party that was in New York with Eric for his first book coming out on Lean Startup, and we were like, we need what he's talking about. So we go up to him and afterwards and say, hey, Eric, like, we're leading innovation at GE. Can you come and talk to our company? And he goes, well, you're not a startup. Like, why would I do that? And I think he said, and do I have to wear a suit?
And you're like, yes.
And he did come. He did come the first meeting in a suit without a tie. And so we
sounds like Jack Dorsey.
Yeah. Yeah, so we
testifying in front of Congress.
Yeah, it was awkward, right? And so we put a pilot project together. We threw him in. We said, we're going to put a project together. And he was able to sort of in a pretty short time show an integrated team. The beginning he comes in, and I remember they were sitting like this. They were like, okay, smarty pants, you know, software guy, what do you know? You talk about a change order. You can make 50 change orders in a week. We can't make one order change in a year. What do you know? And he showed them what he knew, and he challenged their thinking, and he brought them in. And you know what we learned, it was the fear that was holding people back, and it gave birth to something we called FastWorks, and Lean Startup was just a piece of it, but it was really this test and learn, minimally viable product became a really great way to get change going. Okay, just test it. Just give me a prototype. And again, software people and think that's the way you work, but not every organization is used to doing that.
I think that is a really important point. Another question from the audience is, so you have really sought out weird experiences, as you've taken on different, more senior roles. For somebody just starting out in their career, how do they keep their perspective broad, expose themselves to weird things, but also build credibility within an organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I just think if you're curious, you have to quench that part of your thirst anyway. I would say, one, just do it in your spare time for sure. Start seeing the patterns. And I advise people just simple things. Become the one on your team that is always sort of representing a new trend. Can you start just a quick email every week, once a month, to your colleagues saying, here's 3 trends I'm watching, and here's a TED Talk, here's an interesting person I just met, and why I think, the important thing is why I think it's relevant to us, because otherwise then you're just like the, shiny, just chasing the shiny object, which I have been. But I think that try to make it relevant. Try to come back and make it relevant. Get out there. Just go to events. Go to talk to if you have an opportunity to talk to your customers in a different way, ask to go visit your customers. Ask them really different kinds of questions than your colleagues are normally asking them. I think the more you can bring it back and say, this is relevant to a consumer, this is relevant to one of our customers, people will listen to you.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is please continue to do your day job, because nobody likes the person that it's like off at Burning Man because they're going to get great ideas for your company, but they didn't return anybody's email for like 4 days. So I think it's like a balance between.
It is a balance. It is. And again, if it's that notion of it's like 10% of your time.
Hypothetically, I don't know anybody at my own company who might be that person.
But again, if you're going to go to Burning Man, I think you have to go with a bit of a hypothesis too. You don't just go because, hey, that's cool. I mean, maybe Burning Man's a bad example because maybe it's not as relevant, but I remember when I was doing digital, took a team and we went to South Korea and Japan, and we went and judged boy band competitions in South Korea. That was another weird thing to do.
That's pretty weird and awesome.
And I remember we had a pretty big tab that night because we were in this bar, and but it was we had a hypothesis that this is where certainly at the time South Korea was the most digitally savvy and that the boy bands were where a lot of the new apps and a lot of the new music things were happening, and we wanted to understand the culture. So we had a hypothesis. It's not like we just picked something random or said that would be fun, so let's go have a trip to Korea. We had to get money to do it. We had to put, not everybody has a big budget. I often find the things that are the most serendipitous are the best ones. You don't need a big budget for these things. Ask people different questions. Next time you go to an event, a networking event, don't just say, what do you do? What trends are you following? What's a new thing you've seen in your industry that you find really fascinating? When you're talking to a customer, what's the weirdest thing that you've seen lately? What did you do about it? I think that you can do that simply by asking new kinds of questions.
I think that's such a great point. Speaking of people who are, or companies that are stringent on budgets, one of our audience members asked, you were on a show, you said what was sort of the most surprisingly innovative company out there, and you said Walmart.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I'll give some context. I think in terms of, they said you can't pick any new tech company. Okay, so that as a bit of qualifier. And I'm just, because I worked for a big company, I'm into transformation stories. It's easy to be disruptive when you start from scratch and you don't have legacy issues to deal with. It's easy to be innovative. It's not easy to be innovative in any situation. Let me reframe that. It is really hard to transform when you've been around for a while and when you have big scale. And look, they've had a few missteps, right? They haven't gotten the digital thing right. Seemingly now they, either with fear, patience, whatever, they've started to play to their strengths. They acquired Jet, realizing they had to be digital, and they've started to accept and recognize their need for their physical locations in a way that I think is pretty smart. And so I like some of these traditional companies, and I guess I would, especially sitting here in Silicon Valley, you've got Google down the road, you've got Apple down the road, you've got Amazon up a plane ride away on this coast. These are these are becoming big companies that are at huge scale with huge expectations about what they're going to do next. Are they going to be able to reinvent what's next? Are they taking enough meaningful risks? Are we asking those questions now? And are we looking to some of these older companies that have had to go through this? Look at Tesla right down the road right now. There's a lot of challenges at Tesla. We could probably have a whole lecture on Tesla, and I'm not an expert, but I think one of their issues is scale. And so are they learning from what GM has done? Yes, we want to dismiss GM and say, oh, they're yesterday, they're the horse and buggy, but there are some good things they've done. Right. So how crazy would it be for the Tesla team to, and they are hiring those kind of people, to say, Tesla might have a culture issue. Are they looking at more established companies that have really invested in the people and the culture and getting them to transform at scale? As these companies here get to these places, they need those kind of role models, which maybe they're not thinking they need.
It's interesting from a cultural perspective, because if you think about, raising a pirate flag outside of your company and rallying a really small team to be better than those stupid people over in Detroit, or the stupid people up in Seattle, or the stupid people in New York, because we're smarter, better, and doing something. And that is actually, if you've built a company or a product that achieves growth and scale doing that, and not GE scale, but like San Francisco scale, like that's different scale. When you make that transformation and how you make that transition actually becomes pretty challenging.
It does, and you have to keep renewing yourself, and you still need those pirates within. Right. And that's
even Steve Jobs finally took some Microsoft money.
Yeah, but it's a fine balance if you're leading these scaled companies, that you need both. You need the people who can help you, the sort of precision operations, and you need to constantly reseed the pirates. And I think you look at these big companies. I mean, GE is a classic case. It's in a tough place right now. It's a really great company, but you could say, could it move faster? The complexity of that company, I don't think people outside for sure and even inside appreciated the complexity that came with all that scale and how hard it is to reboot some of these things with speed and scale.
And that's actually one of the other audience questions is, as you reflect back on your nearly 30 years at GE or at NBC and GE, you know, are there moments or are there inflection points that as you fast forward a decade to today where, you know, the complexity and the challenges are actually a little bit overwhelming the story? You know, how do you think about it? What's your sort of assessment? And also just what's one practical thing that as you look back on, any of us listening to this tonight or in the audience can kind of take away as we think about the story of GE?
Well, I think that you don't get to be a 125-year-old company without knowing how to transform yourself. So there are always highs and lows. And they're always going to be that, and you always have to. There has to be some part of the company that believes tomorrow is going to be better than today, and so are you making room for that? And I could show you right now if I were to take you to Evendale, Ohio, where they're creating the future of aviation and manufacturing. They're 3D printing in metal and creating a whole new way of working. That future exists there. Yeah. You have to believe it and you have to see it. And so I think you have to have some patience. I worry a little bit about our short-termism and where we are in the financial markets right now. It'd be easy to just blame investors. They deserve a return. But I do think our lack of impatience and somewhat imagination for the future stymies some of that. Right. And so what's my lesson is that you constantly have to move at the speed of the market. You can't get complacent. Your culture needs to feel energized and a bit of fear at the same time. And you need those rebel pirates always within. Always within. And you just can't become such a perfection machine that you ignore the rebel pirates that you need within.
Is it easier, does the precision machine end up having more resilience than the rebel pirates?
I think you need both.
You need both, but which ones are easier to, or is it just basically time?
I think it's basically time.
Okay.
I think it's basically time because you have to believe those rebel pirates are going to get you to the next level, and then you have a team that knows how to get to scale and operate at scale. Right. So you kind of need both, and we dismiss those people who are good seeding things. What's the trajectory here? Is your future as a startup founder? Is your future? Play it out. What are the scenarios for you in the future? You scale, you go public, you get acquired, or you just keep sustaining in some level, right?
Yes.
And so,
or we go out of business.
Or you go out of business, right?
Not happening tomorrow. So that's
but the traditional thinking is you're either going to go public or you're going to get acquired.
Yes.
And then once you get either of those scenarios, you get big. And how are you going to start again? You get acquired and you're going to leave because you want to start something all over again.
I do not want to start something all over.
But I'm just, that's tend to be the path for people like you.
Yes.
And yet that seems pretty dismal.
Well, and this is relevant to a question.
I mean, for you it's not, but for established companies to not have that regeneration machine.
Well, and that's actually one of the really interesting questions that is from an audience member, but apparently also super relevant to me at this point, which is, in a large company where there is a lot of ways in which you are protecting the organizational resiliency for the status quo is super high. Yeah. How do you, if you are living in an innovation center or a nascent project that loses its executive sponsor, or the person who does the acquisition who then leaves or buys your product that then leaves, how do you think about, if you are on that team today, as it looks like one of our audience members might be, how do you think about the things that team can do to preserve itself and also have the footprint and potential to really sort of show something forward? I mean, maybe it's going to find a different executive sponsor.
It is. That's what you have to do, because I think the chances are pretty good if you go if you get acquired or you go into a company thinking I'm good because I got this champion, they're going to be there. They're not going to be there. Yep. So I think you have to, so it's a lot of just building, you're building influence. You're building, in bigger organizations, I think it's the same if you're running the city of San Francisco, you're in the governor's office. I mean, organizations, you need to have influence skills. So you're constantly having to be out there and finding new people to join your kind of merry band of people who are trying to create a different way. And they're getting benefits, and you're working on projects that they care about, and you're trying to understand the problems they're trying to solve. That's what you have to do. Right. You cannot just wait for someone else to say, okay, now Gina, you know, I do it because I said so. Right. Because there are going to be a lot of people after a while who aren't going to do it that way.
What is your favorite example of a project that had one sponsor and found another one?
Let me think about that one. That's I have to think about that one. I'm trying to think. I mean, this isn't exactly the right answer, but I know when I was at NBC and we had Hulu as a concept, and we brought in Jason Kilar, who was the founder of Hulu, and we had tried a lot of things internally that didn't work. And it was setting it up as kind of a separate kind of entity, and he had the ability to come in and take whatever he wanted that was good from the company and reject what wasn't good. I remember at the time there was a video player that had cost a lot of money, and it was horrible. And he said, no, I'm not going to take that. I'm going to build my own. And so he had to have the freedom and he had to have both champions who kept him protected and said, no, it's okay, we're going to keep the funding, and he had to make new ones along the way. He had someone like me or other people who were his early champions. I got pulled back to GE. He had to go and make sure he had other people who were there fighting for that, because you're going to be pulled. And if it had to be him, his way putting forward, and people had to see, oh, this guy's doing the right thing. And they had to see a bit of bravado in that. So that was an example I saw where he forged his own path and was able to create that healthy balance of being an entrepreneur, yet knowing how to navigate the systems in two companies, not just one.
Well, and that is great, because that was another question from the audience, which was, how did Hulu come about, and what were the learnings around Hulu in terms of innovation and doing something, being able to, I mean, there are not very many examples of a Hulu-like experience that is still alive, let alone thriving in the way Hulu is.
Yeah, well, I think because there were several sort of really false starts where the typical NBC thing was, we're going to build our own video player and we're going to protect it, and it was going to be walled garden, and we're going to do it, you know, we're going to just basically protect all of our IP. And after trying that a couple times, and it failed miserably, and people were panicked at the whole YouTube arrival out of fear, right. We got together with News Corp. And so that's the first lesson, I think, was it was a partnership of two fearful people. News Corp had tried MySpace and hadn't had luck. We hadn't done well with iVillage. And so we said, let's figure out how do we come together and out of fear, create something. So I think that was an important step that had to happen there, and finding a great entrepreneur. So we hired someone in Jason Kilar. I mean, he was the founder of Hulu. We were the champions that got it going. We kind of protected it. We had to get the right equity structures in place so people could come from Fox and NBC and people from the outside. So we had to set up a different equity structure that was very frustrating in the company. We had to set up a separate funding mechanism. People inside the company resented that because they're like, wait a minute, I'm established. I'm making all the money here, yet you're taking money that I need and giving it to that project. Yes, you have to do that.
And how did you guys navigate that? Because that is the core of where the innovator's dilemma comes from, where it's like, wait, if you give me $1, I can make $2, and if you give him $1, he's going to flush it down the toilet.
Yeah, well, we just
except
all
for
in.
10 years from now.
Yeah, we were all in.
Right.
We believe in this. At the time, Peter Chernin was the head of Fox, and Jeff Zucker was NBC, and so they like made sure that the funding was there. We put a good process in place. Anyone that would complain, they wouldn't listen to them. So all those things, as a leader, you have to be very decisive, and you have to say, yeah, I understand that's important, but this is important too. Now, that being said, I often have thought Hulu could have been much more even bigger than it was if something like the cable industry had embraced it and said, hey, this would be our Netflix killer.
Right.
They saw Netflix coming on, but they wanted to build their own thing. And so the cable networks started to do their own versions of that, and that's also what happens. Everybody wants to build their own thing. We tried to get other networks to come on board, but they were building their own thing. And so there were a lot of missed opportunities.
Right.
I think you could look back over 10 years and say it could have been faster and bigger if more of a consortium had come together and said, let's back this new innovation.
And what were the qualities that Jason had as the entrepreneur in charge that any of us can take away, just in terms of navigating skeptics and navigating people that are logical in the sense that they could make that dollar today $2 or $5 versus an idea that is riskier or doesn't have 100% chance of success?
Well, he was actually probably part naive and willing to think he could actually make a go of it with two big established behemoth companies. So he was able to have enough optimism for the future to not let that weigh him down. That would be the first hurdle. A lot of people are like, are you kidding? I'll never go work for big companies. Mm-hmm. His real thing was he was focused on the customer, the user. It was all about the user experience. Again, we're in Silicon Valley, San Francisco. We know that now. At the time, I remember having bitter debates because it would be like, let's put another ad in the ER because we need to boost our earnings. And the reality is we basically destroyed the user experience because it was too many ads. And he was fighting against that. And he was strongly keen on that. And he didn't accept ads in the beginning. And so he fought the machine. Right. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, silly things like, we all did this. We bought this big fancy office in Santa Monica and all this fancy, we had like consultants. And he's like, you're silly. I'm going to sublet that out. We're going to go to Costco and get our furniture. Again, an entrepreneurial mindset. Again, what we've come to appreciate. But that can exist in every company.
Well, it certainly exists at Walmart.
Yeah,
so,
it does. Yeah, it does.
So, as we're coming to kind of the final phase of this wonderful conversation, let's just take us to today. So, from your perspective, as you're looking at the current environment, not just from what we talked about earlier of a fight for the future, but you're on the board of Nike. No one's really paying attention to anything that Nike's doing right now.
They've been so quiet. Really.
And how do you, as somebody who is imagining the future, thinking about where we're at, doing the kind of three-step, three validating process for what the trends are, where do you think we are right now?
I think we're afraid, and I think we're hanging on to what we know. I like the Nike story. I'm sure you're talking about sort of the Just Do It campaign they've re-released and the Colin Kaepernick attention that they got. But I like that it's a story, right? It's they went back to their past. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of, you do have to appreciate your past. You can't ignore your past, but you're never going to go back there. You have to reinvent it for where you are and where the future is. Right. And so I love that as a story of understanding their consumers. And the consumers now, our customers want to know you stand for something. Mm-hmm. So what do you stand for? Right. Are you standing for a fight or are you standing for it? And I think, and I do think the pace of change is so fast and disruptive that we ought to appreciate that people are afraid. And maybe all of our talk of we're all going to be living on Mars is just a bit too far. And let's deal with some near future kind of issues, and let's take some steps to deal with them. So we've made the future almost too far off and scary. The past is so inviting because it's so what we knew, and how do we get sort of focused on the near future of the things that we can all sort of build a story around. That's what I worry about right now, and where I feel like when I say fight for the future, it's that fight for a future that we can all see that it's within our grasp.
Right. What are you the most excited about in the near future?
I'm most excited about. I do think there is this sense of people wanting to take a stand in things, wanting to tell their story, wanting to be more authentic. I think we're seeing just the sense of authenticity of people wanting to own that. I'm excited about that in products, in business, in communities being built. So I'm excited about that. There is a resurgence of positivity about the economy. Is that going to hold? I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the future of work. It's a fearful thing, but what I love for all of us is it's reinventing how we think about the future. And I think we need more creative problem solvers. How are we thinking about the new jobs of the future, the near future? Are we bringing more creativity? Are we bringing in more strategy? Are we bringing in more figure-it-out kind of jobs? I think there's a professional fluidity at work where you're going to have multiple different things you do in companies. You don't just have to have one specific job that you do, and you're going to have multiple titles potentially of what you do that make much more enriching jobs. I hope that's what we're building.
Well, I love that. I think it's a great spot to end. Our thanks tonight to Beth Comstock.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks a lot.
Former vice chair of GE and the author of the new book called Imagine It Forward. I got that part. That was in my head, but I want the subtitle, Courage, Creativity, and the Power of Change. And as a reminder, Beth is going to be signing books that you have hopefully all purchased, and one for your friend at work. And she will be signing books outside. And again, I'm super thrilled for tonight. This has been such an inspiring conversation.
Great job. Thanks a lot. Thanks for keeping it going.
And thanks to everybody on behalf of the Churchill Club, or Commonwealth Club. What am I saying? Everything starts with a C these days. No, I'm really thankful for everybody for hosting, and thanks to Wells Fargo.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.